Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dan Hugues, and I'm going to be taking you through this Color Efex Pro 4 webinar this evening. We're talking about the Nik Collection 2 by DxO, specifically Color Efex Pro 4, and we're going to talk about recipes. We're going to talk about filter combinations. I hope to walk you through the interface, and if you're an extremely, if you're new to the software, I hope to get you comfortable up and running with the software. If you're well experienced, then hopefully we can get you some tips and tricks during the next 45 minutes or so. And I should probably mention that my name's Dan. I was the webinar trainer for Nik software from 2009 to 2014. And DxO has reached out to me to conduct a few webinars here and there. And all of these webinars, as you may have seen already since you did register and show up to the webinar, are on the Nik software website webinar page. We've got a whole bunch of webinars coming up this month, so me and also Joseph Lanashki is going to be demonstrating about all of the new cool things that are that were released in the Nik Collection 2 by DxO. We're going to talk about some of those things today, the ones that pertain specifically to Color Efex Pro 4. And I want to talk a little bit about Photolab as well. Photolab is a proprietary raw processing software that DxO develops. We'll get into that about halfway through the webinar-ish. And I should mention that the essential version of Photolab 2 does come with the Nik Collection. So if you purchase the Nik Collection, it will come with this raw processor. We'll talk about some of the great things that the software can do. So let's see here. We're going to begin the presentation navigating from Photoshop. Now, I personally either use Photoshop if I know I'm going to be doing a good amount of pixel movement and I want to use layers and layer masks and blending modes and those sorts of things integrated with the Nik Collection. And then a lot of times I'll actually just use Lightroom, so I'll do my raw processing with Adobe Lightroom and then go into the Nik Collection from there if I'm not having to do extensive work or multiple pieces of software and so on. If I know I'm going to use numerous pieces of software from the Nik Collection or any other set of tools, I tend to use the Photoshop versions of the software so that I can utilize layers, layer masks, blending modes, smart objects, all of those great things. One of the things that I'm finding right now, though, is that as I've just gotten Photolab about a month or 6 weeks ago, I'm utilizing that for my raw processing and then usually using the Nik Collection from there. And then if I need to, I'll actually take my image from Photolab into Photoshop from there. We're not going to talk a lot about workflow. I'll gladly answer any questions you might have about what I'm doing and why I make those decisions. But I just want to make sure you guys are familiar with sort of my mindset when doing this. For demonstration purposes, we're going to be launching from Photoshop here, and then we're also going to be launching from Photolab. All right. So I'm in Photoshop right now, and I've got an image that I've utilized Adobe Camera Raw's raw processor to make some adjustments to the white balance to try and clean it up a little bit. And then I've used Color Efex Pro 4 to stylize the image pretty substantially, actually. So a quick look at the before and after. Here's the original sort of raw processed image. It's a little bit flat, a little bit linear. And then I've actually just used a preset built into Color Efex Pros for the En Vogue presets. It's 10 presets that now launch or come with Color Efex Pro 4 as of the Nik Collection 2. And then also I've added a film edge to this. I don't remember doing that, but it looks pretty cool. So let's take a look at how to do that. So first things first, when launching the software from Photoshop, you have this handy-dandy Nik Collection, or Nik Selective tool rather. If your Nik Selective tool doesn't come up automatically when you launch Photoshop, what you can do, so I've just closed it out, what you can do is go up to the File drop-down menu, go to Automate, and then go to the Nik Collection Selective tool. So this is how you can access the Selective tool if yours doesn't pop up automatically. You can actually even move into the settings and tell the Selective tool to pop up whenever you open Photoshop. I let it come up whenever I use Photoshop because I use the Nik plugin so often. The other way to access the software, for those of you who are not familiar, is to go to the Filter drop-down menu in Photoshop and then down to the Nik Collection. Let's go ahead and launch Color Efex Pro 4. So I'll just go ahead and click on the actual software here. We're going to get into what these things are later on, but let's click into Color Efex Pro 4. I want to give you a quick run through of the interface, and then talk about the presets, talk about all the cool things that you can be doing when using the Nik software or Color Efex Pro 4's recipes and 55 individual filters. In fact, just to kind of cover this, for anyone who's not familiar with Color Efex Pro 4, there's 55 different filters built into the software for thousands of different effects. I'll show you some of those different effects and how you can start to combine these different filters together to create different aesthetics for your photography. So right now we've opened into the sort of standard Color Efex Pro 4 interface, and on the left side we have our filter set. And what's been happening as I open the Nik Collection recently is that the recipes, so if you follow my cursor into the lower left corner, the recipes actually launch automatically, and the en vogue recipes specifically will come up. These are 10 recipes I actually had the opportunity to design for DxO's Nik software, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And each of these recipes is basically a different combination of filters. So if I click on like Blue Monday here, and I say, well, first off, it's going to give me this warning saying adding a recipe will replace the current filters that you've got on the right side. I just say yes, and now it's going to apply that particular recipe. That warning is going to come up anytime you click on a recipe, unless you say do not show again. So once you understand that the filter stack on the right side is going to be replaced anytime you click on a recipe, you can just say don't show again. I don't do that for this computer because I present from this computer and I have to be able to explain exactly what's happening. Now, I actually do want to start with a recipe here and kind of explain what it's doing. I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom and I'm going to click on the lavender recipe here. And as I do that, what you'll notice is tonal contrast, brilliance and warmth, pro contrast. The last recipe that I clicked on, we're going to get a new set of filters. And in this case, it's just Film Effects Nostalgic and then the Detail Extractor filter. Now, every one of those recipes that are built into the software or any recipe that you create yourself, I'll show you how to do that in a couple minutes. It's going to be saved onto the left side of the interface into the recipes section there. In fact, if you follow me to the upper left corner, I'm going to click back. And as I go back, I actually have 41 recipes in my software. 21 of them are custom ones that I have created. 10 of them are sample recipes that come with the software and have come with Color Efex Pro 4 since it was released. And then also the en vogue recipes, those new ones, are going to show up there in the recipes dialog. You can import your own. So if you download somebody else's recipes or you create your own on, let's say, computer A and you want to take them from computer A and put them onto computer B, maybe you have a laptop and you want to take the recipes off of the laptop, put them on your desktop version, you can click the import button. And any recipes that you have saved, you're going to be able to navigate and find. Now, one last thing, because we are covering basically the left side of the interface here, we have a history state browser. So in the lower left corner, if I click on history, what this does is it actually records every single thing we do to the software as we do it. So the last thing I did was clicked on the lavender preset, and if I go and I start adjusting that preset, let's say I affect the detail extraction or the contrast or anything like that, it's going to be recorded in the history state browser. If I want to go back to a previous state in the history, I just go ahead and click on the state that I want to move back into, and it skips me back into it, which is a really nice feature. And there's actually several other things that you can do pertaining to viewing the image with the history state browser. Definitely check out the videos that are on YouTube. You can actually just search. If you go to YouTube in the Nik Collection page, you can actually search for all of these kinds of videos and see some cool stuff. Learn about recipes and history browsers and so on and so forth. Okay, so to finish the top part of the interface here, so just to kind of cover these tools for anyone not familiar, right now we're in the single image view. And if I click and hold the compare button, it shows me the before, or our original image as we brought it into Color Efex Pro 4. And as I let go of the compare button, you see the after. The next preview option that you have is the split preview. So if I click on the split preview, it cuts the image down the middle by default. You get that little red line. You can actually click on it and drag it back and forth. This is a really great way to compare different portions of the image and see exactly what's happening kind of in real time throughout maybe a detailed area of the image instead of just using the single image view and comparing the whole thing. And then, of course, the last preview you have is the side-by-side preview. I'm actually going to tap the Tab key on my keyboard. It's going to hide the left and right menu there. And in the middle of our side-by-side preview, we can actually click on it and it's going to rotate for us. So this way I've got a really nice view of my before and my after. I use this from time to time if I'm doing a lot of work on with Color Efex before or any of the Nik plugins to sort of do a once-over before and after side by side, just to make sure it's exactly what I'm looking for. Switching back into the single image view, I'm going to tap the Tab key again on my keyboard. Brings back our menus on the left and on the right. And I'm going to talk about the zoom capabilities later in the webinar. I'm not going to worry about it right now because I want to just jump into what's going on with our filter stack, how to add more filters to the recipe that we've already clicked on. In fact, recipes, presets, I kind of view them a couple different ways. I like recipes and presets for numerous reasons, but one of them, and my most favorite, is to kind of get a feel for the potential of the image. Sometimes I'll have a really strong vision as to what I think my image should look like. Sometimes I want an image to be part of a series, and sometimes I kind of like one-off photos, and I'm not exactly sure what I want them to look like. Well, recipes help in all of those cases. They help for consistency. Like if I wanted to make a whole series of images that had a similar look to it, I could just reuse the same recipe that I've created or that I've downloaded or one that's built into the software over and over and over again. It's going to give me the same general effect and look. Another reason why they're great is that you just see the potential of 10 or 20 different ways of viewing your image by simply going through the different presets or recipes. And then the sort of exploratory aspect of them is really nice because what it'll do is you can, as you click on recipes or as you click on filters, you can turn them on and off. So if I move to the right side into our filter stack and I actually click on the toggle button that's to the left of the label in the filter stack, I can see what this filter is doing. And in this case, the Film Effects Nostalgic is the sort of stylistic powerhouse, if you will, of this particular stack of filters. Here's the before and here's the after, and you can see it's doing the bulk of the work for this photograph. The detail extractor is a little kind of corrective tool. I do like what this image looks like without any of the detail extraction. So here's the, without, and here's with. But I think I prefer the image with the detail extraction on the whole photo. Although as I'm toggling this on and off, as I will usually make, decisions on the fly with these sorts of things, I'm deciding that I kind of want to remove the detail extraction from the center of the image here and from the bricks, because I think those details are kind of becoming distracting in my mind. So what I'm going to do is with the detail extractor filter, move to the minus control point button. In all of the Nik collection, as well as in PhotoLab, we have what's called U-point technology. You're likely familiar with this already, but it works like this in Color Efex. You have minus control points to remove an effect from a particular area or object in an image, and you have plus control points to put that filter effect in a particular area or on a particular object. In this case, I want to remove the detail extractor from the brick and from this portion of the image, on this sort of the background buildings there. So what I'm going to do is click the minus button. I'm going to go and just click on the object that I don't want the effect on. And then in Color Efex, we have two sliders to deal with. We have the size slider, which this is the size of the control point, basically the area that is going to be influenced by the control point. And what this point is doing, again, is removing the detail extractor, as you can see. In fact, if I click and drag it, you can get a good feel for it. So I'll go and place it in there. The control point is looking for that object inside of that circle. It's not making a circular selection. It's making a selection inside of the circle of the tone, color, and texture, among other things, that the control point is basically deciphering and saying, okay, this is the object. We don't want detail extractor on that object. If I make the area of influence really big, the control point is going to think that we want to remove the effect off of any of those like tones, colors, and textures. So what I want to do in this case, since I really just want to remove it from this portion of the bricks for the most part, and that area here, is I'm going to place that minus control point, size it to just encompass the size of the area that I want to affect, and then the second slider is an opacity slider. And in the opacity slider, this is the control over the amount of the effect of the control point. Basically, if I take the opacity to 100%, this minus control point becomes a plus control point. I'm putting the effect in. If I slide it down to 0, it's removing all of that effect from that particular area. I'm going to reiterate this throughout the webinar. I've got a couple more images where I think it's more effective for being able to see exactly what's going on there. But we can look at the selections that these control points are making. We can control the amount of the effect that the control point is sort of being utilized. And the next thing that I want to do is just toggle my entire detail extractor on and off one more time to see if I like what's going on with it. And in this case, I do. I'm happy with it, so I'm going to leave it. So from there, I'm going to actually click the Add Filter button, and I'm going to add one more filter. And funny enough, I'm actually going to add the detail extractor filter again. It's one of my favorite filters. It's a really great corrective tool. It can also be used for stylistic effect. And in this case, I know I've got some decent detail in the clouds up here, but there isn't a lot of contrast in the clouds, and I want to bring that out. So I'm going to go over to the filter list on the left side of the interface, and I'm going to click on the detail extractor one more time. And as soon as I click on that filter, it's going to be applied to the entire image. I only want the effect in the clouds up here in the top. So what I'm going to do is click the plus control point this time. And watch what happens. In fact, I'm going to take my detail extraction slider up. It's going to be garish and way too strong of an effect for this image at 71% with that slider. We'll talk about what those sliders are doing in a second. But I'm going to take the plus control point button, and I'm going to go ahead and place the plus control point in the sky. And now what's happening is I'm telling this software that I only want the effect of the detail extractor filter, this particular application of it, in the sky. So if we look at the before and after, the before and the after, I think the effect is probably still too strong. We need to kind of massage that a little bit. But what's happening is now we're only applying the detail extraction in the sky, and so now we're able to bring out that texture that's in the clouds. We're able to bring them out just a little bit. So from there, what I'm going to do is go and decide on the adjustments from the detail extraction slider and the contrast slider. Basically the tools palette that's on the right side with this particular filter. And I don't necessarily need to add any saturation in the sky, although we could with this particular filter. I think if I wanted to really control the color just in the clouds there, I'd probably add a different filter that would give me different kinds of controls over color. So I'm going to take that saturation slider to 0. By just clicking on the percentage, I can just tap 0 on my keyboard. It brings that down to 0%. Let's see what's happening with the before and after. There's the original. There's the enhanced. I think I'm affecting some other sections of the image that maybe we don't want to. So let's take a look at how to control these control points. So I click on the word control points on the right side of the interface, and then it opens up a list of control points. We only have one control point on the image, so only one is listed. But if I had a whole bunch, we're going to get more and more listed out there. I don't need these, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this control point, tap the delete key in my keyboard to get rid of it, and it's gone. So let's look at the selection that this control point's making. I want to, I'm in the control point list. I'm going to go ahead and click on the little checkbox that's to the right of the control point. And what's happening now is that we're able to see what is being affected by that control point in the filter specifically, and what isn't. The stuff that's white on screen is being affected by this detail extractor. Anything that's black on screen has none of the filtered effect. And what these control points do is it makes a really sort of clean photographic looking selection, right? And so what's wonderful about this is that I don't have to worry about sort of really detailed masking myself. I don't have to paint things in or out or worry about making complex selections and so on. It just does it for me. And you can see it does a really good job around the edges of these buildings here because there's a good amount of contrast between the edge of the building and the actual sky. I do want to remove the effect from these buildings, though. I just want the effect from this detail extraction in the sky itself. And maybe even in some of the reflections of the window. But what we'll do is we'll kind of assess that visually instead of trying to, perfect the selection this way. What we'll do is we'll end up just sort of turning this off, toggling the effect on and off, and we'll be able to hone exactly what's happening. Again, what I'm doing is just dropping minus control points on the areas where I don't want the effect, and you can actually see the removal of the effect based upon where we place these control points, right? It's a really interesting tool. It's a really great feature, and it makes it so easy to be able to control all of these different aspects of the image. And right now, we're just dealing with the detail extraction. We can do this with every single filter. And just in terms of workflow, I don't find myself using this feature on every single photograph. Where I find myself using this sort of mask viewing, and here's how you turn it off, by the way. Just click on this little button on the right side. I only find myself using this feature if I turn the filter on and off and I can see that it's affecting areas where I don't want it. I'll go and look at the selection and kind of start to refine it really nicely. As I toggle the effect on and off now, I'm seeing I'm getting that detail in the sky that I'm interested in getting. I'm actually going to add a little bit more contrast, and I'm going to increase a little bit more of the detail extraction. I like what I'm getting now. We've toggled it on and off. We've looked at our selection. I'm going to just click the compare button one more time to just make sure I'm enjoying what I'm getting out of the image. I like this. I think it's effective. The last thing that I'm going to do, because the image had this when we opened it up, is add one more filter, the image border filter. So I'm going to click the add filter button. And I'm going to add the image border filter. Now, this filter kind of emulates image borders, right? And I relate it to going into the darkroom and printing an entire full frame. Let's say in this case it's a 4x5 crop, so it's not exactly right here, but basically the full frame image. If I were to take the film holder, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the term, of course, during the demonstration, that would go in the enlarger, file out the edge, it's going to give me a nice black border around the edge a little bit. Now, this particular filter, it has a whole bunch of these different kinds of effects. So clicking into the drop-down menu here is going to allow me to see these different effects. We can randomize these different edges, and we can adjust them with the size, the spread, and whether we want a clean or a rough edge. So definitely an interesting effect. Like, let's say we like type number 12. Just to show you this filter, I'm going to click on type number 12. I'm going to adjust the size so I don't encroach so far into the image. I'm going to go ahead and decrease the spread. So, by the way, the size is how far into the image the effect is going to encroach. So in this case, it's kind of cropping into the photo. There's a trick to make it so that you don't really crop into the image. If you're in Photoshop, there's some things that you can do. I'll gladly talk about that after the webinar. The spread here is the thickness of the stroke around the edge. And then the clean to rough slider, this is simply how clean or smooth you want that edge to be, or how sharp and rough you want it to be. So you can sort of run that any way you want. And then the beauty, or my favorite part of this filter, is that you can vary the border 9,999 different ways. It's like a randomizer here. So what I enjoy so much about that is I will use this border over and over and over again, but randomize it. And then when I've got prints or images, I can put them next to each other, and they don't have exactly the same border every time. They have the same style border, same aesthetic, but a different, slightly different sort of randomized edge effect, which I think just kind of makes the thing look a lot more honed than if I had the exact same edge every single time. One of my favorite things to do with this filter is to actually use type number 1 or type number 9. I'll actually thin out the spread basically to -100, and I might clean up the edge just a little bit. And what this does is it just gives me these kind of rounded edges here. So it looks a little bit more organic to me, a little smoother in my mind, but we've got a white border. All right. Now, from here, let's say we're happy with the effect. I understand I'm taking we've been 28 minutes on this one image. I've explained quite a lot of stuff. Let's move on to another photograph. I'm going to click the OK button in the lower right corner. That's going to bring us back over into Photoshop. We will be working in a non-destructive manner because the background of the original image will still be a layer. And what Color Efex Pro 4 is going to do for us is it's going to duplicate the background. It's going to apply the effects that we just adjusted, and then it's going to apply them to that final image. So there's the before, and there's the after. All right. So let's switch over into this photo. I'm going to just make sure everybody's good to go with no questions or anything. Yep, I don't see any questions at this point, so I'm going to minimize that. And let's talk about a portrait photograph. And in this case, this is my friend Shima and Val. I got married a couple years ago, and I've got this lovely photograph of them holding hands. It's kind of a static photograph. There isn't a whole lot of movement. I kind of enjoy their sort of central location with these leading lines moving in. But, and the light's beautiful, but the whole thing's a little bit flat, and I think it needs some oomph, if you will. So what we're going to do is something more like this. So it's a series of filters from Color Efex Pro 4 that's going to kind of give us a little bit more direction towards Shima and Val, direct our eye a little bit, and let's take a look at how to do that. Now, actually, as we do this, we're in Photoshop, we're in the Nik Selective tool. Right now I have my filters, my favorite filters, sort of ready to go here. These are some of my favorite filters. And I use Pro Contrast all of the time. I use Detail Extractor all of the time, and Cross Processing all of the time. Maybe not so much foliage. So I'll show you how to add and subtract these filters from the favorites list. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and click directly into the Pro Contrast filter. Color Efex Pro 4 is going to launch. And this time, the first filter, or the only filter that you're going to see in the stack on the right side, is going to be that Pro Contrast filter. So the benefit of favoriting your filters, or one of the benefits of favoriting your filters here in the Color Efex Pro 4 software, using from Photoshop specifically, I can open directly into that filter. It just saves me a few seconds, and I don't have to move into the filter list and go find Pro Contrast. I know I'm going to be using it. Now, the way to favorite and unfavorite a filter, if you move over to the left-hand side of the interface, my foliage filter is favorited. I know that because there's a little gold star to the left of the label. If I don't want it in my favorites list anymore, I can click on that little gold star. It's no longer highlighted. It's no longer in there. I do use things like infrared film. I do use brilliance and warmth, dark and light and center. So I would actually go and click on all of the stars of the filters that I'm using most of the time, and it's going to show up in my favorites list, which is both in the Nik Selective tool, and that's also in the favorites list for your presets or your recipes here in the upper left corner. Sorry, it's neither of those things. It's the filters list. I can click on favorites, and then I just have all of my favorite filters. And the beauty of operating this way is I can just sort of streamline my workflow. If I don't use all 55 filters, I don't need to see all 55 filters. So if I'm only using 5 or 10, you can favorite those and put them into that section. Now, I will say, be careful if you're using those favorite filters. You know, there are so many things that you can do with all of these filters. I do find myself using most of them, most of my favorite filters, most of the time. And let's say I don't use the ink filter that often, but the ink filter does have an interesting effect. And the beauty of all of these tools is that they're malleable and adjustable. So let's say I like this effect, but it's too strong. I can just go and bring that down. So now I have a little bit of this nice warming effect with the ink filter. Definitely interesting. What you'll find with these filters, as I go back to the Pro Contrast filter, is the stylistic filters are oftentimes a really stylized version of your image. And you don't have to leave that initial default settings on, and you don't have to transform the image as I don't know, as strong or as much as the default setting does, but it is good that, let's say, the Film Effects Nostalgic filter does this. It shows you what the idea is, and then you can move into the tool set on the right side and kind of go in and make that your own and really control it the way you want it to. I don't want them to be glowing pink right now, so I'm not going to use this filter in this case. Let's talk about Pro Contrast. It's one of my favorite filters. It's an exceedingly powerful filter. It allows us to correct any color cast sort of automatically, and it allows us to correct the contrast in a really beautiful, subtle, and simple way. Although, if you want, you can really turn it on if you want like a really high contrast version of your image. I'm just going to bump this up about 30%. The correct contrast slider is going to kind of optimize the image for us. Dynamic contrast is a proprietary algorithm. It's specific to Color Efex Pro 4. And what this does is it's a contrast adjustment, but it is a dynamic one in so much as it adjusts the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows in a different way depending upon the photograph. So it sort of assesses the image and allows us to control the photograph and the contrast in the photograph based upon this particular image. So just this one filter, it's a really beautiful corrective tool. There's the beauty, or there's the before. There's the after. I like the pop that we're getting out of this. I'm going to click the Add Filter button. We're going to add Detail Extractor. She's in a wedding dress. There's a lot of detail in her dress. I want to bring out a little bit more detail. This is a brilliant filter for bringing out texture and details in things like wedding dresses or whitewater or bright highlights or dark shadows. I only want the effect in her dress though, so I'm going to take a plus control point, place it in her dress. We're going to look at the before and after, make sure it's doing exactly what we want it to do. I like what's happening there. I'm also going to go back into Pro Contrast and see if I can remove the Pro Contrast filter just from up here because I was blowing out some detail in her dress. So let me rephrase or say that again. I was in Detail Extractor. We added the detail extraction into her dress, but I noticed that the adjustment that I made with the Pro Contrast filter was too strong at that point. So I clicked into the Pro Contrast filter, and then I can add control points, and we can adjust. So as you go throughout your filter stack and your workflow, you can actually go back and forth between the different filters in your filter stack very quickly and easily. So I'm all done with both Pro Contrast and the Detail Extractor filter. From there, I want to warm their skin up quite a bit, and I'm going to warm up the entire image. There's a series of filters that are actually pretty good at doing that. I'm going to go ahead and just use the Skylight filter in this case. The Skylight filter emulates what would happen if you were to use a glass skylight filter in front of your lens. It basically warms the entire photo. So there's the before, there's the after. I think at default it's a little bit too strong, so I'm just going to dial that down just a touch. And then if we didn't want the skylight filter in a particular area, like in her wedding dress, you can just take the minus control points and remove it. If I do that though, in this case, now her dress is totally neutral and her skin looks a little bit orange and weird because of the application of the filter everywhere except for the dress. So instead of leaving the minus control point at 0% opacity, I'm going to go ahead and drag the opacity slider up to like 30 or 40% in this case. It's going to warm her dress a little bit, and so her skin isn't going to look as affected. In fact, as affected by the filter. I'm going to go ahead and just drop a control point on her skin and some of the highlight areas as well, so that it doesn't go super orange. I want her skin to look somewhat natural, and on my screen it was looking a little bit orange. Okay, so that's the Skylight filter. From here, I say we try to direct the viewer's attention in towards our subject. So I'm going to start to do that by kind of relighting the photograph. Click the Add Filter button. We're going to move to the left side. I'm going to add the low key filter. This basically darkens the image down pretty substantially by default. I don't need as strong of an effect in this case, so I'm going to bring the standard low key down just a touch. Each of these filters, of course, has its own set of sliders. Some of them are more self-explanatory than others, like the glow sliders, pretty self-explanatory. The low-key slider, the stronger you have that effect, the darker the image is going to get. And then you have a dynamic low-key slider as well. And what this slider does, I'll relate it back to Pro Contrast. It's looking at the image and it's affecting the highlights at a different rate than the midtones and then at the shadows. So basically, it's dynamically adjusting these tones, and it allows us to create a more controlled environment, because now we can darken this image down in a dynamic way as well as sort of linearly, like with the standard low key a little bit. And then B, you can create an effect that other people can't necessarily affect or create. Even folks who are using the Color Efex Pro 4 software, if you go in and create your own sort of series or your own recipe with a particular set of slider adjustments, you're going to create something completely different than the next person is going to be creating. And that goes, or you can see that when applying the En Vogue recipes that are built into the software. If you actually click on those and you start running through the different slider adjustments, and you look at the overall opacity sliders that are in the En Vogue recipes, you'll actually notice that there's some pretty specific opacity adjustments to those things. Or maybe the shadows and the highlights sliders are being controlled in a particular way. You can create those same kinds of effects. You can create your own, or you can download them as well. So there's all sorts of recipes available like that. Okay, so low-key filter. I've added that in. This is a stylistic effect. What we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is direct your eye as the attention, or your eye as the viewer, in towards our bride and groom here. In this case, I've added the dark enlighten center filter. This is going to do a really nice job to kind of direct your attention towards our bride and groom. And I'm just going to make this a little bit more subtle. So the center luminosity slider, that's going to allow you to brighten or darken the center. What I love about this filter is that it's kind of like a vignette in terms of I tend to use it to darken the edge and leave the center a little bit brighter, or brighten up the center. And it's kind of not like a vignette because you can't really tell that this effect has been added on. It just does a really nice job to kind of relight the photograph in a relatively natural-looking way. In fact, if we look at the before and after now, so I'm going to hit the Tab key on my keyboard. I'm going to get rid of those tools. On the left, we have the original image, and I'll admit it's a relatively subtle set of adjustments, but you can see a difference. We're directing the viewer's attention. We've created an image that has a lot more depth to it using the dark enlighten center as well as the low key filter. And then we're warming up the skin in the overall image in total using this filter stack. Let's say we like what we've done here and we want to save the recipe. What you would do is click Save Recipe on the right side, and then you can name the recipe. But wait, let me show you that, and then I want to show you an advanced trick, because let's say you shot 5 of these images and they're pretty similar, and you want the control points that you've used to be duplicated from one recipe from one image to the next. I'll show you a trick for that. Right now, if I just click the Save Recipe button, and then I name this, I'm going to say Shima and Val Test 1, and click OK, that's going to save into the custom recipes. So let me move into the Shima and Val Test 1 recipe. There it is. It's saved. I'm happy about that. The thing is that is not going to save control points, because the software is expecting that we probably want to use this recipe on a whole bunch of different photographs. And different photographs are going to have different compositions, and therefore we're going to want to have control points in different areas. If you do have an image where you want to save control points, let's say like the Pro Contrast filter is applied and we've removed it from her dress and his shirt, and Detail Extractor is being applied only to her dress. Let's say we want to use that and use these control points. If I hold the Shift key down on my keyboard and then I click Save Recipe, that's actually going to save the schema and val test recipe again as I type that in. Schema and val test. I'm going to say with control points. Click the OK button. And because I held the Shift button down when I clicked the Save Recipe button, now those control points are going to be saved. So just to show you that, if I click on Super Punch, this different recipe, it's going to replace all of my filters and all of the work that I've done, right? And we get that effect. If I click on Schema and Val Test 1, and I replace the filter stack, we're going to get that back, the filter stack. But now when I click on Detail Extractor, my control points are gone, right? My Pro Contrast, my control points are gone. We want this to happen because recipes you're generally going to be applying to different kinds of photographs. In the case where you want to save control points, I would make sure to label the title of the recipe with control points. But now if I just click on that recipe and say yes, now as I move into Pro Contrast or Detail Extractor, any of the control points that were saved are going to show up there. So that's a nice kind of advanced trick for recipes. I'm going to click this OK button in the lower right corner, and that's going to apply the effect. I'm realizing that I've come up on basically 43 minutes of demonstrating, and I've only used 2 images. I have a couple more photos left. So we're going to take a look at least one more, and I want to show you another trick using recipes, and that's how you can actually apply more than one recipe on a single image. To do that, though, I want to jump over into Photolab, and I want to just show you how to launch the software from Photolab. So Photolab 2 is DxO's proprietary raw processing software. The essential version actually comes with the Nik Collection 2. This is a really powerful raw processor, and I find myself using it more and more. I used it initially when I found out that the Nik Collection was purchased by DxO a couple years back. I got excited because they were going to be implementing control points into a raw processor. And this is absolutely incredible. In fact, I'll just show you that really quickly. Let's jump into a different photo. I'm going to open this image into Color Efex in just a minute. But just very quickly, because I definitely need to show you this, because you can actually adjust light and color and sharpness and blur using control points in DxO's raw processor. Photolab 2. I've clicked on our image here. I'm going to click into local adjustments. And the beauty of this is that I'm working in a parametric image editor. I can always go back and re-edit the image. And this is really beautiful and really wonderful because my control points get saved and I can go in and adjust them. In fact, this control point was already placed on the image, right? And this control point, from the last time I adjusted this photograph, had an exposure adjustment, contrast, micro contrast, a little clear view, and then some highlight adjustment. Each control point in Photolab has these kinds of controls, your luminosity and brightness adjustments, has color adjustments, has sharpness adjustments, and so on. I'm going to add just one control point, kind of show you what it can do. Oops, I need to actually click New Mask, and then I add a new control point onto our object. And what this does is it allows me to selectively control light and color, right? And so this is to the nth degree. I now am happy because I can go in and adjust the vibrancy and the saturation on this photograph in a non-destructive way, and I can go back and re-edit as I see fit with these raw files. It's really beautiful. I just wanted to show you that aspect because control points, U-point technology, has been integrated into this raw processor. Let me go over into this last image before we sort of transition into a short Q&A here. And this is a photograph that was shot with an iPhone. It's nicely done. I think it's actually a little bit complex. The lines kind of direct us towards the model here, towards the subject, and so I'm generally happy about that. But I want to sort of hone the image a little bit and direct your attention some more. So we're in Photolab. we're going to launch into Color Efex Pro 4. We're going to take a look at this image and a couple more examples of recipes and filters as well. So in the lower right corner of the Customize portion of Photolab 2, I'm able to click on Nik Collection. It launches this nice little plugin selector, and in alphabetical order, our plugins are listed. I'll click on Color Efex Pro 4, and what's going to happen is Lightroom, or sorry, let me minimize that. Photolab is going to duplicate this image and open into Color Efex Pro 4. So it has showed up behind my interface for some reason. And what we're going to do is start with the contrast in black and white recipe. So I'm going to click yes. It replaces that recipe that we were just dealing with. This is the black and white, or contrast in black and white recipe. There's my 45-minute timer. We've got a black and white filter in Color Efex Pro 4, and personally, if I'm going to be converting an image from color to black and white, I'm typically going to be using Silver Efex Pro because it has a lot of different kinds of controls that I find myself interested in and I love a lot. But this filter has some interesting effects. Namely, this drop-down menu here has a black and white conversion. It's going to operate kind of like the Silver Efex 2 black and white conversion. Tonal enhancer, and then dynamic contrast. And these are just different ways of Color Efex Pro 4 converting our color image to black and white. And the beauty of the dynamic contrast adjustment is it looks different, right? So I can create a different looking black and white photograph. I can then go into my filter color and I can transition, basically looking, the image is going to adjust as if we're going to be using a glass color filter when shooting black and white film. So the color filter slider lets us control the tonal range and the way that the colors are responding when converting from color to black and white. I want to go ahead and set that to around the yellow color filter. Her skin tone is going to really start to pop quite a bit when set sort of towards orange. And then I can reduce or increase the strength of that filter. I'm going to actually leave that up pretty high, and I'm going to just increase the contrast enhancer just a little bit. It's going to really make this pop. I like what's happening. Let's take a look at the before and after. So the original image, I am kind of directed towards the subject because the human eye is going to be attracted to the highest contrast, most saturated areas, as well as probably first the human face, right, when viewing an image. But it's because there's so much color and it's such a complex image, I'm interested in converting it from color to black and white. And then the last thing that I want to do in this particular filter stack is add the dark and light and center filter. Again, it's kind of like a sleight of eye trick, and so I can darken down the edge just a touch and brighten up our subject just a little bit. If I've got too much contrast, we can go back into our different contrast controls and start to reduce that. But the dark and light and center filter is really directing the viewer's attention towards our subject, and there's still a good amount of movement around the photograph. Now, the last thing that I want to show you before we transition into a Q&A is how to keep this filter stack and then apply another recipe on top. And what that basically means is we can use kind of two recipes at one time. So let me know if this translates or not. So I have my filter stack. If I, whether or not click add filter button, I don't think that actually matters, but I click the add filter button, I'm going to move into recipes. And if I hold the shift button down and I hold or add red rocks, what's going to happen is we're going to keep our original filter stack, and then we're going to add whatever the filter stack is from that particular recipe. So now we're applying two filter stacks, right? And I guess to drive this home, if I were to delete all of these filters, I'm going to do that one by one just by clicking the little X button that's to the very right of each one of these filters. Just to delete each one really quickly. We're going to have the original image, right? I'm going to add two of these recipes right on top of each other. So I'm going to add Blue Monday by clicking on it. I'm going to say yes, that's what I want. And then I'm going to hold the shift button down, and I'm going to add the, I don't know, soft mute recipe, and we're going to add from photo stylizer, cross processing, and contrast only. We're going to add whatever that soft mute filter is going to do. So we've got duplex, classical soft focus, and an infrared film recipe. And that's just another advanced trick when using Color Efex Pro 4's recipes. So you can combine these different kinds of things together. That shift button is very helpful with recipes. You can save control points with it. So I hold shift, click the Save Recipe button on any filter stack that has those control points, or you can just continuously add more and more recipes together by holding that Shift button down. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So for the sake of time, because I could sit here and talk about Color Efex Pro 4 in hours, or for hours and hours and hours, I'm going to go ahead and cut this one off for this demonstration, and we'll transition into a quick Q&A. So thank you very much for joining, and have a great night.